Really excited to see you all, and I'm excited for our topic today. I think this will be hopefully really interesting, informative, and productive conversation for the TAC to talk about complaints and grievances. This is one of the most frequent um, topics or areas that, as I was speaking with all of you, that you brought up in terms, many of you brought up in terms of being an area that the tech should focus on. So it's one of the highest priorities. And then as I talk to others, sort of who are outside the tech, but are working on NEMT in some way, it's also a topic that seems to come up frequently, and people feel a little stymied about, what to expect and where to go and those types of things. So I think this is going to be a really interesting and productive conversation today. So let's go ahead and Bambi, if you want to display our intro slides here, we'll go ahead and roll into it. Um, so I want to start by taking a look at the agenda. So if you go to the next slide there, and we'll go over briefly the agenda. So first off is our objectives, the things that we're hoping to accomplish today. The first one is to really look at the current requirements for NEMT complaints. And so maybe I just lost there we All right, I think we're back. So look at uh, what the requirements for the current requirements are. Excuse me, for complaints, grievances, and appeals. So this is really looking at sort of contract requirements for CCOs and brokerages, OARs, those types of things. Then next we'll move into um, looking at discussing best and promising practices within the current NEMT complaint system, grievance and appeal systems, and then hopefully move to identifying and developing recommendations for NEMT system changes to improve experiences for OHP members. So we'll start off with sort of this welcome. We'll get into some logistics and ground rules here in a minute. Then we'll move to that first area, really looking at the background, how things are designed to work. We'll spend about a half an hour, 25 minutes on that. Then move into sort of operations, current operations, how it's working or not working now. And then have some hopefully and for that operations piece, excuse me, we've assembled I think a really good panel of folks from CCOs and from brokerages, the Oregon Health Authority, to really share with us how things are working, where they're working well, and where there may be some opportunities for improvement. And then we'll move to sort of an open discussion amongst you all, TAC members, to talk about how it might work better, and ideas that you have that you think might help in terms of improving the system, whether that's new requirements that you think would be helpful, whether that's data that having that available or posted publicly or whatever that might look like about those complaints that brokerages and CCOs are receiving. Same thing with grievances and appeals, to have that data available, maybe some other ideas. Hopefully you've all had a chance to sort of think about that, and we can have some discussion about that later in our agenda today. And I think that it'll be really helpful to have that open discussion, both so that you can generate ideas and bounce ideas off one another, but also having our expert panel will be able to sort of vet some of those and hear about why those ideas might work, or they might be more challenging, or maybe they're already in place in some places. So with the goal of sort of coming out of this meeting with sort of draft recommendations that the TAC can provide to OHA. And we'll talk more about what that looks like as we go along and what the next steps might be with that. So with that, I'm going to pause there for just a second, see if any of our TAC members have any questions about today's agenda or any additions or anything that you want to talk about before we jump over to ground rules and then into the meeting content. So I'm going to pause just for a second, see if we, yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to let folks know as we go through today's meeting, I'm going to be concerned with barriers that might present, if any, as far as the whole process is concerned. And I think that getting a wider perspective, if folks are being mindful and you're taking notes as we move through this agenda, maybe just jot that down so that when we get to the discussion, we can have a fuller discussion about that.
Great. Thank you, John. Anything else from any TAC members?
Yeah, David.
Yeah, George, go ahead.
When the CMS from Washington, D.C. has put these new requirements now for grievances now starting January 1st of this year, is that going to be, from what I understand, an EMT will have to follow those same requirements, right?
Yeah, so I think, George, this might be, so Andrea from OHA is going to give us a presentation on sort of current requirements, and that might be a good place to ask this question to see if she has any information on that, or we can, put it on a parking lot and come back to it at a later time if she doesn't. But let's put a pin in that for just a few minutes, and then we can come back to that question. It's a good one.
Okay.
All right. So, Bambi, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll hit sort of the ground rules and get rolling. So, just as a reminder to most of you that we have the TAC in place. It's a virtual forum to generate recommendations and provide feedback to OHA on Oregon's NEMT system. And just a reminder, as we have our discussions, hopefully this is a safe place. And people feel, empowered and safe to be able to share ideas, challenge ideas, all of those things. And in order for us to do that, TAC members need to remember to be flexible. This content is really guided by all of you and the NEMT project team members and the discussions that we have together. So, when we think we might be heading in one direction as we learn more from each other, that might shift a bit. And that's really a sign of this being a productive sort of forum for everyone. Remember to be open, honest, and humble. Lots of different perspectives and lots of different ideas, and some of those may sort of conflict with one another, and that's okay. And actually, that's very healthy. That's why we've assembled the group that we've assembled with different representation with each of you, different perspectives, and we all have an opportunity to learn from each other's expertise. And then finally, just remember to be engaged. It's really helpful when you all are actively participating in these conversations, in our offline emails in between meetings, and all of those things will lead us to the best possible outcomes to make recommendations and hopefully have to OHA and hopefully have those implemented. So next slide. A couple of things to remember as we're in this virtual forum. So Microsoft Teams logistics. If TAC members can use webcam whenever possible, helps create this, make this virtual environment as sort of real as possible. Would ask that you remember to mute your microphones unless you're speaking, so that we can all hear one another and we don't get crosstalk on the audio. We have a lot of folks in the room, and so making sure to use the raise hand function to share a question or ask a question, share information will help assure that that you're seeing, and that we get to your comment or question. You can also add information and questions to the chat, and I'll try and track that, and invite others to help in terms of tracking chat from our TAC members, to make sure that we hit on those as necessary. If you're having technical issues, you can send a message to Bambi. She's helping us coordinate. And again, just remember to participate and engage with the material and with one another. We do have a number of members of the public that attend our meetings, which is great. I would ask that we have the members of the public leave your cameras off and your microphones turned off for the duration of the session, so that TAC members are able to be on screen as much as possible, and that are able to have those discussions. So we just as a reminder, there is a web page that has all of our meeting content, gets updated after each of our meetings with materials from the meetings, agendas, recording, action items, those types of things that come out of our meetings. So it's a good resource, and the web page is listed there. So with that, if you want to go to the next slide, just by way of introduction here, I think I saw Andrea here with us. So she's going to, as I mentioned in the intro, Andrea from the Oregon Health Authority is going to give us an overview of sort of the CCO grievance and appeals system. So what those requirements are, those types of things. And so without further ado, go ahead and turn it over to Andrea. And I think, Andrea, you have some slides that you wanted to project. Are you able to manage those on your own? Is that
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, super.
Yep,
If you want to do that, I think
get
that would be great.
Okay, let me just share my screen and do this thing. Okay. If you can just confirm that you can see that.
Yep, we got it.
Awesome. Perfect. Awesome. Great. Well, just want to say hello, everyone. As David said, my name is Andrea Smith. I'm with the CCO Quality Assurance team. And I think I was with you all at your last meeting talking about the quarterly NEMT Quality Assurance Report. And today I'm just here to provide some overview about the grievance and appeal system. So you can see here on our agenda the plan to just give kind of a high level overview about what is the system, what are the requirements with that system, both from just how it functions and then expectations OHA has for the CCOs and how they utilize that. And then I'll also go into how OHA gathers data related to the grievances and appeals and how we monitor that system as well, which also feeds into process and reporting improvement that we're actively working on. And that'll also come up in later conversations on the agenda. And then I'll just have some like regulation links and stuff if you want to get into like the super nitty gritty of it all. But yeah, all right, let's just go ahead and hop right into grievance and appeal system overview. So really we call it a grievance and appeal system. But, did someone have a question? No? Okay. So we call it a system because it's a big process and it outlines a lot of different things. Grievances, appeals, hearings are part of it. But really the system is really providing information and details about how CCOs should be handling these things. And that's part of what we'll go over as well. And so a grievance is really what is the mechanism for members to file a complaint if they're not happy with their service. So it could be they're not happy with the CCO, their healthcare services, a provider, whatever the case may be. OHA considers a complaint to be the same as a grievance, a dispute to be the same as a grievance. And really, ultimately, if a member is unhappy or unsatisfied with their experience, we want and encourage them to file a grievance so that the CCO can be notified of that and take actions to resolve whatever that issue was. And then just for example, when we talk about a complaint or a grievance, some examples could be, if keeping NEMT in the context, it could be, difficulty utilizing the system to request a ride maybe, or maybe not feeling respected by a driver, or having a safety concern with a driver, or a late pickup or no pickup or whatever, just anything at all. There are no like limitations. If a member has a concern, they have the right to file a complaint with the CCO. So that's what, just kind of in a nutshell, what a grievance is. And then an appeal, which is the other part we'll talk about, is really talking about when a member wants the CCO to change a decision that they have made around an authorization or payment of a service. So in the context of NEMT, this might be a member has submitted for mileage reimbursement and that's denied. Maybe the member wants to appeal that decision because they feel like it should have been paid. So that's kind of getting a second review of that. So again, high level on appeals, and then I'm going to go to our next slide and we'll go a little deeper in each of those. But those are the two components that really make up the system, with a grievance and appeal system. Okay, so when we're talking about grievances, just like I said, members can make a grievance anytime that they want to. There's no limitations there, and they can do it in writing or by phone. So they can just call and make that complaint to make a formal grievance, or they can do so in writing. That could be on a piece of paper, handwritten, an email. It could be a form a CCO may have specifically used for that. So it can be lots of different ways, but really trying to give members options, different ways in which that they can make that complaint. And then also their representatives, if they have an authorized representative or even a provider, can make a complaint on behalf of a member as well. But they do have to have written permission to do so. Because we don't just want people randomly making complaints on behalf of people. Like, they need to be part of that discussion, right? But that helps with mitigating, dealing with maybe barriers folks might have. They might just need help with that process. And so once a member says, all right, I'm making a complaint, I'm filing a grievance, a CCO must review and resolve that grievance and notify members about it once they make that resolution. And they're expected to do that within 5 business days, with the option of extending that timeline out to 30 days total, if they need more information. So it might be that they need to reach out to the member to get clarification, or they're going to communicate with a provider, or whatever the situation is. But every step of that process, there is an expectation that there's communication with the member about that. So either it's resolved in 5 days, or you're still getting a notification in 5 days that work is still being done to resolve whatever that issue was. And yeah, so that's the grievance process. Again, just kind of in a nutshell, with the timelines associated with that is kind of a 5 to 30 day type of timeline. And on the appeal side, it's a little different. So if a member's request for service or payment was denied, then they can ask for an appeal within 60 days of when that denial is. So sorry, my mind just totally went blank for some reason. So yeah, they get 60 days to make that complaint, and part of that's accommodating for mail and all that kind of stuff that happens. And then, like I don't have it on the slide, but like grievances, a member can request an appeal by phone. So they can just call the CCO and say, hey, I disagree with this decision. I want you to take another look at it. And also, man, now I keep thinking of things I should have put on the slide. The other thing I would call out about appeals is that when it's back to the CCO to look at, the CCO is re-reviewing their case. And it's someone who did not do the first review. So you're getting second eyes on it, because, we're human. People make mistakes. It's possible they made an incorrect decision. Someone else gets a chance to look at it and can go, no, actually, that should have been a covered or approved service. At least that's the goal often when people request an appeal. So the member's essentially asking for someone to re-review that and confirm if that denial should really be in place or not. And so when that is received, the CCO has 16 days to review that appeal and make a decision, though they can extend that review for an additional 14 days, up to 30 days total. And a lot of the times that comes into play where maybe additional information was needed. So if I go back to like a mileage reimbursement example for NEMT, maybe a receipt was missing. So like the service, they originally submitted the request, but they were missing information. And now that they're re-reviewing it, the CCO says, hey, we need more information. So they might extend that out to request that from the member or maybe their doctor or whoever. So just really giving that flexibility to really do the due diligence and look at all of the information before making a decision about that appeal request. Members also have the option to ask for a fast appeal or expedited appeal, where instead of that 16-day time frame, it would be a decision within 72 hours. And the goal here is really when we're looking at if that denial of that service would put a member's life, health, or ability to function in danger. So again, if I'm thinking about NEMT, if someone's right to say, I don't know, chemotherapy or dialysis treatment was denied, very likely that person's going to have a strong impact on their health if they're not able to get to that appointment, right? So that might be an example of when someone wanted to appeal a decision and do it in an expedited way. So the CISO reviews all of that, and then they will decide if they can overturn their original denial. Like they look at all the paperwork and go, actually this should have been covered. And then they'll overturn that appeal and help facilitate the member getting whatever the service was that was denied. But if the denial is upheld, which, will happen, there's very legitimate reasons services are denied. So, if the denial is upheld, the CCO will send that notification to the member. And that is pretty much it at the CCO level. However, if a member still disagrees with that decision, they can also request a hearing through the state. And then there's a dedicated hearings unit who reviews all the documentation that was associated with the original request, the appeal, and then they'll help facilitate another review of that. And sometimes they're able to resolve it pretty quickly, and sometimes it gets escalated up to an administrative law judge to review. So there's this other escalation process. And I'm not really going into the hearings process in this presentation, but I did just want to call out that is another piece that's part of this puzzle and another option available for members when they are wanting to kind of get that approval or denial re-reviewed. And then the other requirement I just wanted to call out is that there are federal and state requirements around communicating grievance and appeals requirements to members, because we want to make sure that they're getting as much information as possible so that they know what their rights are and that and how to make these requests and go through this system, because it is a complicated system. People aren't going to know if we don't tell them how the heck to go through all of that. So the list I have here are the three primary ways that a lot of this information is communicated via the CCO member handbook and the CCO writer guide. And these are documents that the CCO publishes that members are received upon enrollment into the CCO, or if they request an additional copy, or if they lose it or whatever. But the member handbook is a really broad document that goes over all different kinds of benefits members have in different ways to access their benefits and services. And there's a whole section all about grievances and appeals and explaining what a grievance is, how to make a grievance and access those services, including, looping in other resources like the ombuds, if someone feels like they might need more support, that sort of thing. And then the writer guide is NEMT focused, about all things NEMT and how to utilize NEMT services. And in that, there's also a whole section on grievances and appeals. The idea being that a member can always find out about this information if they're going back to these documents. And then finally, for notices that are sent to members, specifically denial notices of your services denied, or notices around appeals, that kind of thing. We also require that they include grievance and appeal information, because, you know, maybe someone lost their handbook. It happens. So we want someone to have that information immediately available, where they get the notice that says you've been denied, but if you disagree, here's how you can reach out for help, make a complaint, or file a grievance. So they always have that information available on hand. And that's really the goal there with the member communication piece. So that's like kind of the high level grievance and appeal system, just really general. What is a grievance and appeal? Some of the timelines and how we're trying to ensure that members are aware of their rights to these services and how to use them. If anyone has any questions about those things, I'd be happy to take those now. Otherwise, the next step I have is kind of talking about how we gather some data about the grievance and appeal systems and what we do with that. All right, George, see you've got your hand up.
Now, don't know if you know this, but now OHA is now going to be requiring a new committee called the HERC, H-E-R-C, for reviewing things when the CCOs don't. How is the HERC going to fit in the structure with CCO and OHA?
I do not know the answer to that. I wonder if anyone on my team who's on the call knows, please feel free. I wonder if you know more about that, George, if that's maybe something that would be involvement with the hearings committee then, where after it's gone through the appeal process and then OHA gets involved. Is that what you had?
Well, when I was in the meeting with this HERC, go between OHA and the CCO bit, it was when a consumer or customer or member thinks that they need to be covered on something like the surgery or any type of review, then if it's not approved by the CCO, then it goes to the HERC reviews it, and then it goes from there.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think that probably falls, I mean, it's very related to this, because when there's denials, right, we go right into this process. But it sounds like that might be a shift in how we operate around service authorizations. I mean, that's something I can ask about and see if I can get some more information to share, but not, unfortunately, I don't have any details on that at this point in time.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Sorry, George, I just wanted to call out for Bambi to identify this as a thing for us, a question for us to follow up on.
Okay.
Okay, great. And I think we had Shannon next.
Yeah, thanks. I just am curious as to who or what processes are in place for monitoring compliance of the CCOs for the timelines you laid out and for resolution. Like we often file grievances with clients, but we never know the outcome of those. Like, and we have things that are outside of this timeline. So I'm curious about like who monitors the compliance, or is there a process for monitoring it?
That is actually what my next slides cover. So
I'm
I'll
just
go
ahead.
over
I'm just
those.
ahead of you.
Yeah, love
Awesome.
it.
Awesome. I love it.
And if I do not answer your question, please let me know and I'll try to go back and address it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have Elisa.
Hi there. And this might kind of tie into what was just asked, but I was wondering, so if somebody makes a complaint or a grievance on behalf of the member, who gets notified does the person making the complaint, or does it automatically go to only the member?
I am actually actively pulling up the rule right now because I do not remember off the top of my head. The member absolutely gets a response. Let me make this a little bigger. So this is the rule. This is one of the ones I link later that talks about the grievance process requirements. So I just want to make sure I'm not misspeaking on this. Okay, so I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a, well, I don't want to misspeak with that. And if someone else on the OHA side knows off the top of their head, please feel free to chime in on it.
I do.
Um,
Andrea, this is Ellen.
Thank you,
Principal.
Ellen. I
My name's Ellen
appreciate
Penny.
it.
I'm Principal Ombuds for the Oregon Health Authority. The answer to that question really rests with whether the person filing the complaint is allowed to speak on behalf of the client. So if somebody calls our program and says, my auntie was left on the side of the road in the wrong place at the wrong time in front of the wrong provider's office, I'm filing a formal complaint, we'll say, are you the legal guardian? We say, we would love to talk to your niece or nephew. Please have them call us. We are here to serve them. If you want to get on the phone with us, we can do a three-way call. But legally, if the person filing the complaint does not either have a formal kind of legal status, guardianship status, parental status, or a request, what's called an ROI, I think that stands for release of information. We can't communicate back with them. We can be a sponge of information from them, but we can't communicate back with them. And I know this because I just got off a call with a district attorney about a case where they don't have an ROI. And without an ROI, I can be a sponge. I can help their client, but I can't go back to that DA. I hope that makes sense.
That definitely answers the question. And then just a little second part to that question is, how does the member or the person making the complaint, how do they get notified? In what form do they get notified?
They have to be notified in writing of the resolution.
Okay. So
Yeah.
they get it mailed directly to them. If their address is correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Okay.
All right, great. So Andrea, if we can, we're running up against time just a little bit. So if you want, I don't know if you can do sort of the next section in 5 minutes or so. Is that possible? Okay, super.
Yep. I'll just kind of zoom through here a little bit. So I really just wanted to call out those areas to address that. I'm sorry. I think it was Shannon who had asked about what we're doing to do some monitoring. So this is kind of what this section is about. So one of the things that we do is look at the CCO's policies and procedures because they're required to have processes in place to ensure that they're following all of these requirements. And so that is reviewed by OHA. And we've done some very comprehensive reviews, like line by line, are they doing all of the things, or is that at least outlined in their processes? And then we do something very similar with their notices that they send out to members. Is they have templates that they use, kind of just canned things, and they fill in the blanks. And those are required to have that specific information with grievance information, denial information, and how to request an appeal. I was alluding to that before. So it has to have very specific information, and we audit and look at those as well. And then another thing that we do is we call it a sample review, where we actually request the actual denial notices that have been sent to members and review them. So they can have a template and they can have a policy, but are those notices actually doing what they say they're going to do? So we're looking at the actual things that are going out to members. And we look at more than just the notice, like, was the decision correct and things like that. But in terms of the grievance and appeal side, we're looking at, is it including all that information that they should be sending to members. We also have a grievance and appeal log that is a quarterly data report that is sent from the CCOs to OHA. And this includes some very detailed information around every prior authorization that comes through for that quarter, every denial, that's what that notice of adverse benefit denials is. So every denial that's sent out, every appeal request and its resolution, and every grievance and its resolution. And the information includes, who's the member who requested it, what is the timeline, meaning when was that denial issued, or when did that member submit that grievance, including when it was resolved. So that helps us look at timelines, like are they doing it within the 5 days or 30 if they're asking for additional time to work through that. Also includes the type of service. So it allows us, of all the different services in the state, we can go by kind of service. So we're able to look at what are all of these things related to NEMT services specifically. And it's kind of interesting too, because we could have one person's situation listed as a denial and then an appeal because they wanted to appeal that decision, and maybe they also made a complaint, so it's a grievance, and we should be able to see that under each of those sections. And so NEMT has been a part of this reporting. So NEMT has been part of this reporting, but it has been very broad, just NEMT, which is broad. So starting in 2025, that reporting will now allow for separate tracking of just NEMT services and then NEMT reimbursements, because we know there's going to be different kinds of grievances or complaints or situations related to reimbursements versus rides themselves. So that's going to really let us get a better understanding of what is happening in what the member experiences and how services are being provided. And then once we receive those logs, OHA reviews them. We look at them for data quality. We have had some issues around some of the data we're getting is not accurate for a lot of different reasons. And so we've been really working to resolve that. But the goal here is that we're getting good information, and then we can use it to identify trends, common concerns, or compliance issues that need to be addressed. So are we seeing a lot of complaints around late rides? That now gives us an opportunity to have a conversation with a specific CCO about why that might be happening and trying to come up with some solutions to that. There's also some federal reporting that goes on with this, where we send that up to the federal government as well. So that's like the log and how we're using it. And then I also just wanted to call out that we're also using the NEMT quarterly QA report, because up until the future now of Q2 2025, that report has also included denial information, no grievances, just denials. And it's kind of a duplicative reporting for CCOs. So starting in Q2, this NEMT report will no longer capture that. And then we'll be utilizing that grievance and appeal log to monitor those trends and concerns related to NEMT services. And then the goal really would be to looking at that quality assurance report and the grievance and appeal log to look at where there might be issues, and that can help kind of guide discussions with CCOs. And now this is where things might be getting a little ahead in your agenda, David, but was going to talk about like how we've been working to improve this reporting because of the data quality issues we have been having. And I can always come back to this later maybe, but just the work for improvement we've been trying to do where we've identified issues.
Yeah, I think that sounds good, Andrea. As we get into sort of that panel discussion, I think this would be a good thing to be able to talk about that improvement work that OHA is doing on the sort of the monitoring side of things. Okay. And then they're obviously available in the slides, and so folks will be able to see those there as well. So, so did you have anything else, Andrea, before we jump to a couple of questions, or?
Yeah, just really quick, the only other slide I had in here, since you'll get these slides, I want to explain what this is at least. This was just to note that kind of going full circle with the process with monitoring, if our goal from an OHA perspective is if we notice that there's an issue, a compliance issue or a member access issue or something like that, that we want to work with the CCO or brokerage or whomever to resolve that issue. And oftentimes it's a conversation. Maybe there's a misunderstanding that needs to be clarified, whatever. But sometimes that does not get resolved. And so if there comes a point where we're trying to fix the issue, it's still not being resolved, then we might go to a non-compliance escalation, which is a team who works with the CCO and they do some pretty in-depth improvement plans. They might lead to corrective action with the CCO, but this is kind of like that next step if issues are not resolved, if we're finding issues and they're not being fixed. So that's kind of the final piece in that process. And then the last 2 slides are just links to Code of Federal Regulation and OARs and contract language that outlines all of the requirements around appeals and grievances if you want to like dig into that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrea. Shannon, you had a question or a follow-up?
I don't want to keep us too far off track. I know time is short, but in any of that, and forgive me, I know you're just doing an overview of the reporting, but does it include the consumer experience? Meaning I requested a ride at 1 and I got picked up at 11 a.m. and I got dropped off 2 hours after my appointment. Or I requested a ride and it wasn't available to me because it was outside of the hours of operation, even though it was done in advance. So we have, we don't have rides available after 5, for example, but we have a number of services after 5. So I just am curious if any of that, or does the consumer have to file a complaint each time for that to be part of the compliance piece?
So I would say it's always good to file a complaint every time, because if there's a consistent issue, that's how we'll know. The reporting itself, and I would invite my Exhibit I colleague to chime in if she has more information, but the reporting itself has categories. So let's say it's an NEMT grievance. There's like coding that they put in. So it would be, hey, this is NEMT, it's a grievance. And then there are grievance reasons that they select from, and it could be like a late pickup and some other, they're like kind of pre-prescribed reasons for that grievance. So they don't necessarily get to those like really specific examples. However, from a monitoring perspective, if we're seeing, wow, this one CCO has a lot of grievances related to ride scheduling, we can request the details of that and like really look into them. And that can help inform and guide those conversations about what is actually happening here.
Awesome.
So
Thank you.
I'd like to add to what Andrea said. So we would like to really look at the patterns that are happening currently in our data, and logging each and every incident would definitely help us seeing those patterns even more clear.
Great. Thanks, everyone. One more thing, Andrea. So I think you were present when George brought up the question about sort of new federal reporting requirements around complaints, grievances, appeals that went into effect January 1st. Do you have any information about new requirements from CMS, or is this another thing that we should put on our follow-up list?
I am not, the things that immediately came to mind when I got that question were around the shifts we're doing with NEMT. So I don't think I have the answer to that specifically. We might need to follow up on that one.
Okay. All right. We will do that, George. And I might be trying to touch base with you to see if I can get some more information so we can get that figured out and get it reported back to the TAC. So, all right. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, moving from sort of the way that the system is built and the requirements that are in place around these grievances and appeals, to looking at how this has been operationalized at the CCO and brokerage levels, and things that they're doing that are working well, hopefully, areas that they've identified maybe need some work, different initiatives or innovations that they have in place that may be promising, just to get a sense of how things are working or not working at that level. And So we're going to start with CCO, and I think we've got Jen and Yelena here to talk about information from that perspective. Jen, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us here today. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you can see that in a moment.
Yeah, we got it.
So I'm Jen Martinek, and I have my colleague Yelena Wozniak here as well. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the grievance and appeals and process improvement processes from the Care Oregon perspective. Care Oregon works on behalf of 3 CCO regions. So we have HealthShare, Columbia Pacific CCO, and Jackson Care Connect. And we work very closely with our brokerage partners as well, several of which are on this call. So we engage with TransLink. We also engage with Northwest Rides and also our Ride to Care partners in the Portland metro region. Okay. So we're going to go through a few things. I won't spend too much time on that. Let's see. So we have a couple of different ways that we manage grievances and appeals internally at Care Oregon. So my team is the transportation team, and we, as I mentioned already, work very closely with our brokerage partners. And in some ways, we're kind of a liaison between internal Care Oregon grievance and appeals teams and our brokerage partners. So these processes that you can see on the slide right now are really more describing what my team does as we engage with not only the internal Care Oregon teams, but also our brokerage partners. So the general consensus here is that we're really just looking at the information that we have. So what is the grievance or what is the appeal for a denial? Is there anything specific that we need to address? Does it, well, for grievances, does it qualify as an incident? And with incidents, those have special processes. Those are usually for things like accidents involving an injury or fatality, or abuse or alleged abuse by a driver to a member. And so those have different processes as well. But we're really looking for a couple of things like, did our brokerage partners follow the rules? Are they resolving within the certain timeframes that Andrea had also mentioned? And then we're also coming up with our findings and potential recommendations that we can supply to our internal Care Oregon appeals and grievances team so that they have more information and they can also close out the grievance or the appeal on their end. Some of the things that we're looking for, particularly with grievances, we may ask our brokerage partners for more evidence. So this may include things like call recordings or GPS records, if possible, driver statements, potentially other evidence too, so that we can really make a determination on our end as well, whether the brokerage did follow any of the rules or came to a conclusion that we also would have come to. Regarding processing time, I'm not going to go into this into a ton of detail, but as you can see, we do have a number of grievances that we get. I broke it down by not only what our grievance and appeals team receives, but also our transportation team and each of our brokerage partners for grievances, appeals, and NOABDs or denials. As you can see here, there are some cases where there's no information, and that's because our brokerage partners do not deal with appeals. They only deal with denials. And the Care Oregon grievance and appeals teams and our transportation team don't actually send or deal with the NOABDs or denial letters. So that's why there's no information there. Generally speaking, we are well within metrics of the resolution times that Andrea had outlined. We do slightly exceed the average days worked for the grievance and appeals team on appeals specifically, but Andrea also did mention that there is an opportunity for an extension if needed. So I imagine that in some cases we did have to request an extension. Let's see. So with grievance resolutions, there's a number of different ways that we could potentially have the grievance resolved. So our brokerage partners often make a lot of updates to things like the member's profile. So if there's a need for us to make adjustments to the mobility aid or device that the member uses, That might be information that they add to the profile. They'll also add clarifying notes. So if there's things that the driver may need to know in future trip requests, like, going down a long driveway, or, making sure to stop at the house on the corner, things like that, anything that might be helpful for the driver to better connect with the member is also going to be added. And of course, things like contact information. Phone numbers certainly are updated all the time. And so if there's ever a case where the contact information changes, the brokerages are really trying to get that information out to the driver as much as they possibly can. Sometimes there's also things like call center or dispatch representative coaching. So if during the course of the grievance investigation, they identify things like scheduling errors, or there was an issue with a reimbursement fund or transit pass being sent out, they might do some coaching for the staff that were responsible for making those scheduling adjustments or ordering those passes. So it really just depends on the specific case of the grievance there. They might also make adjustments to allow for a preferred or excluded transportation provider. So if the member really, really wants to go with one particular provider, in some cases that is allowed, and each brokerage has different rules around that, so I can't speak to that exactly. But then there's also cases where a transportation provider might be an absolute no-go for the member. And so if the member really does not want to go with a transportation provider, we can also offer exclusions. That does sometimes make it challenging for transportation in the future, though, if we don't have a lot of providers available and the excluded provider is the only option for the member. Sometimes there might be a conversation with the member to see if they are willing to go with that excluded provider. Other types of resolutions might include things like vehicle inspections or repairs. So if there was a grievance about a vehicle issue, the brokerage might actually do an inspection of the vehicle itself, and they might recommend certain repairs to ensure that whatever the issue is doesn't recur. And then lastly, we also have some opportunities for transportation provider coaching, and it might also escalate to something like a suspension or disqualification from the program, especially depending on if there are significant safety issues or just continued recurrences of noncompliance. So at Care Oregon, we have been working internally to try to look for trends as much as possible. And so we've actually created what we call an all CCO NEMT dashboard. And so this looks at all three of our CCO regions. So Northwest Rides, Ride to Care, and TransLink for each of our three CCOs. And we're looking at what are the trends over time. We're looking at year to year, we're looking at month to month. And then we're also trying to look at the monthly ratio of grievances per 1,000 trips. In general, you can see that the trend is actually decreasing quite a bit. So even though the the trip volume may increase pretty significantly year over year, we're actually seeing that the grievance volume is not increasing, which is definitely a positive sign. One thing I will note is that our grievance or our quarterly dashboard is updated on a quarterly basis. And so we don't have the information yet for the end of 2024, but that should be updated probably within the next probably couple of weeks. So this is a little bit out of date, but we'll have that updated soon. Some of the information that we also have been looking at is the grievance categories. So as Andrea mentioned, there's a lot of very specific grievance categories. We've actually bucketed these into larger groups or more simplified categories. We do still look at the individualized categories as well, but for the purposes of the dashboard, it was a little bit difficult for us to look at every single grievance category that we have for all three of our CCO regions. So we've simplified them a bit to see, what are the trends based on those simplified categories. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I won't go into all the details of what makes up each of those categories, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer that. Generally speaking, our largest categories are related to things like provider driver issues, provider ride issues, and scheduling and dispatch issues. Okay, and regarding process improvements, our team, our Care Oregon Transportation team has definitely done a lot of things to try to ensure process improvements. So we, in addition to OHA, also do a review of grievance sample letters to make sure that all of those resolution letters are following the guidelines that we have outlined by OHA. So we're just trying to make sure that they make sense, that they also really align with what the grievance was. So if the resolution doesn't seem to address the grievance in particular, that might be something that we follow up with the brokerage on. We are also looking at things like timeliness, and we engage with the brokerages and our internal teams as well to ensure that we're continuing to meet the CCO metrics and the OHA metrics. We have also created a style guide for our brokerage partners to use. So we're looking for things like, are there ways that we can provide consistency across the board, and not just via the templates, but how do we, provide more consistency in the actual language that's included in those letters, since we only have so much that's actually templated. So how can we potentially provide some additional guidance there? Internally, we also have a Care Oregon member notice work group. And so several of our transportation team members engage in that on a regular basis so that they can stay up to date on any letter requirements or anything else that may come up regarding the member notices. And then lastly, on this slide, we have also dug into our processes internally within our transportation team to try to find some more consistencies. We found that our processes were a little bit rough around the edges. And so we spent quite a bit of time just really combing through our processes to ensure that there was more consistency across the board and how all of our team members are engaging in that. And we also created a more specific e-learning, like a video tutorial, to ensure that our team members know how to follow the same processes. So we have consistent work there. And lastly, in addition to these improvements, we also engage in a regular effort regarding program evaluation. And that included in 2024 a quality assurance focused survey. So I am actually going to kick it over to Yelena for that portion.
All right, thanks, Jen. Hey, everybody. Sorry, am I echoing or does somebody say something? No, okay. So I'm going to go over the program evaluations. I am the program evaluator here at Care Oregon for the NEMT program. I'm going to try to keep this sweet and short. And if you guys have any questions, please let us know. So I want to start off by explaining why program evaluation is important. There's no way to actually explain the complexity of a program evaluation project in such a short time. But basically what I like to tell people is that program evaluation is something that helps you eliminate the guesswork or making assumptions about something and actually having data to make data-driven decision making. And one way to kind of think about that is, imagine you have all this money you want to invest, and instead of blindly investing it or putting it into bank accounts or CDs or stocks, you actually do some research and put some data together because you want to have the best return on your investment. And that's what program evaluation is. It's looking at the program, it's looking at the policies, it's looking at the budget, and it's looking at the activities that the program's doing and making sure that wherever you're investing your time and money and energy into is actually producing outcomes that you want. In the process of designing the evaluation, so this takes quite a bit more time than people might think. So while it is easy to be like, oh, we just want to know how the program's going, what's going well, what's not, the best and some most successful program evaluations are actually based on the questions that we ask. So the data that we end up collecting is all going to come from the questions that we ask in the program evaluation. And that could be either through the survey, a focus group, an interview, whatever it is. It could be an assessment as well. And so knowing what we want to know is kind of like if you've ever had a euro and you've seen them shave off the meat to put into the euro, it's like that. So we meet pretty regularly for a few months, and we really get down to the nitty-gritty of what are we asking, why are we asking it, because it's easy to collect data and have it sitting, but it's a lot harder to actually get down to the depth of what we want to know and actually using that data and that information to make those changes to the policy or changes to the budget or even changes to the program itself to make sure it's actually meeting the needs of the community or stakeholders or partners, whoever it is that's involved. So the survey results, I think Jen or I was going to share some links. So there is snapshot reports that have been posted on either the CCO website or the brokerage website. So the snapshot report does actually report more on the trends that we have seen in the last 3 to 4 years. But there is some information about the quality assurance that we will share here. So if you wanted to see what we have found this year, or maybe more so in the last few years from our program evaluation, you can click on those links and take a look. And then as far as evaluation findings and recommendations, since we are talking about quality assurance, some of the findings that I have stood out for me when I had written the report was having members are reporting that when it comes to their trip denial, they prefer a phone call over a letter in the mail. And the reason is that a letter can delay getting to them or maybe is arriving past the trip that they scheduled. And so in the sense of urgency, they would prefer a phone call from the call center so they know what options they might have or maybe understand why the trip was denied so they can plan something else. They also have reported that the grievance resolution letter was more helpful than the trip denial letter. And I think that's still tied to the urgency of understanding why their trip was denied so they can plan something next. Members also told us that they would like to be able to check the status of their grievance online. And they also are requesting that the grievance letter is shorter, so less pages when they do mail it out. And the last thing is members are preferring to have more information about the process in other languages. So the language differential was actually a barrier that was discovered throughout the NEMT program, and it definitely applies to the grievance process. And that could include members are having a difficult time submitting a grievance or understanding the grievance resolution letter and trip denial letter. And with that, sorry, I ran through that kind of fast, but with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jen, and we could finish this off. And if you have any questions, let us know.
And that's actually our last slide. The last slide is officially just a thank you. So thank you again for having us here. And as I mentioned in the chat, we'll definitely make sure to send the slides over, and I will add the links that Yelena mentioned to the program evaluation slide.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. What I would like to do, if it's okay with all of our TAC members, is sort of hold questions. Sort of thinking about this as sort of a panel discussion. So we'll have kind of this intro and high-level information shared from a variety of different perspectives, and then we can come back sort of with questions for our presenters and our panelists. But I want to make sure that Jen and Yelena, you're going to be able to stick with us for at least a little bit, so that we have a chance to members have a chance to ask questions if they have them.
I can definitely stick around. Yelena may not be able to, but I'll pass along anything to Yelena if needed.
Okay, super. All right. So then what I'd like to do then next is move. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say about if you have specific questions for Jen or Yelena that you wanted to ask right now, I would ask that you sort of jot them down either for yourself, or you can go ahead and put them in the chat so we don't lose them. And then we can make sure to come back to those. So next, I'd like to ask Charles and Tim and Renee and Giselle to talk about sort of these same things, but from a brokerage perspective, and sort of what you're seeing and things that are working and not working. So I don't know if Tim, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. So good afternoon. My name is Tim. I'm the brokerage manager here at TransLink. And instead of me trying to kind of stumble through explaining it, I thought that I would have Giselle and Renee, who are in our quality assurance department, kind of explain the processes that we have. We don't have a slideshow or anything, but what I can do is kind of show you. I can pull up the my screen of our writer's guide and the sections that talk about the appeals and grievances or how we do the appeals and grievance. But essentially, I'll just turn it over to Renee and Giselle to just kind of talk through our process from receiving the complaint, how we handle the complaint, any outreach that we do, collecting information, going back to the member and following up or getting with the driver, all the way to the end where basically we resolve the issue, or maybe it gets escalated. So I'll go ahead and turn that over to Renee and Giselle to talk about our process.
Great, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Renee, and I'm in the Quality Assurance Department here at TransLink. And our grievance process is we try to gather as much information from the member. Sometimes the member may want to send a letter in rather than call. So we definitely accept those, and we reach out to the members to make sure that all the information is what they have sent in to us. And there's not any other things that they would like to add that they may have perhaps forgotten to write down when they're doing that process of writing that letter out. They also are more than welcome to give us a call. If they reach our call center, usually what happens is our call center will either take the information from them or they will transfer the call in here to myself or Giselle, and we will take and gather as much information as we possibly can to make sure that we are not missing anything for our investigation. Once we gather that information, we reach out to the parties that may need to be contacted in regards to that. It could be a driver, it could be maybe perhaps a shared rider, something happened between the two members or what have you. We can possibly gather surveillance video as our NEMT drivers. Some of them right now do have the cameras in their vehicles so that we can gather footage and stuff. We do our best to make sure that we have everything that we need to do to make sure that the process goes smooth. As smooth as it can be for the member and ourselves to make sure that we're not missing out on anything. If there's any actions that need to be taken, perhaps we may need to suspend a driver or what have you. We get with the providers, we make sure that everybody's answering things. If there's more questions we need, making sure that we log everything in regards to the investigation. Sometimes we may have pictures, sometimes we may have a text from a member and or a driver, and we do make sure that we're getting all that information gathered up in a timely manner, making sure that they're getting their grievance letter that we've received it. If there is more time, a timeline that we need to extend, if by chance we're not gathering all that information and it's taking a little bit longer to get what we need, then we do send them a letter letting them know that we do need a little bit more time to make sure that we're, doing the process and getting everything documented properly. At the end of the day, if everything is taken care of and we feel the investigation is 100% complete, then they are sent a resolution letter in regards to what the findings were and for the situation. I do see that Tim does have the denial and appeal thing up there on the screen that he's sharing. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Like I said, the most important thing is making sure that we are definitely gathering all the information, either from the member, the driver, or the facility, or whomever it's coming from, and follow up with any questions that we have.
And through that process too, we have actually collected like video We've had members send us video, of the driver or of a situation. And so we'll take all of that information and compile it and then use that to basically come up with a resolution.
Okay. So was there anything else that you all wanted to share on this? And
Renee, do you
Charles,
have
I know
any?
yeah, go ahead, Tim,
I was
please.
just wondering if you had any insight as far as like some of the denials that you're seeing, and any challenges that you're having with the denial process as far as just being able to, maybe turn around a response, or, if there's any challenges that you're having with the process, or what kind of denials or complaints that you're seeing lately.
Tim, you're asking us that, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I feel like most of the majority of the denials that we receive are either for not prior authorizing the reimbursement, and a lot of the members get sent out that denial letter for not doing so. On the transportation side, it's involving our provider lates of the driver not showing up within the pickup window to make it to their appointments on time, sometimes resulting in missing it. So I feel like the provider lates are probably one of our more challenging parts that we have within our department.
Okay. And John, did you I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I need clarification. So am I to understand that the investigation is conducted by the brokerage, or is it conducted by the CCO?
So if you have a complaint about like our department or one of our call takers or our provider, that will usually be taken care of within our department at TransLink.
So that is the brokerage, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the
Okay.
brokerage will do all of the investigation, reach out to providers or facilities, and collect more information from the member to kind of compile all the information so that we have a complete idea of what this grievance looks like, so that we could have come up with a resolution.
And the resolution you're talking about is done internally. That has nothing to do with the CCO and its investigation, correct? We're talking about two different complaints or grievances. One might be to the CCO and one might be to the brokerage or provider, correct?
Yeah, the complaints for the brokerage will handle, and then they would send out like a resolution letter. But yeah, all of the complaints are basically handled internally. If they go to the CCO might send us some information asking us to investigate it, ask for like recordings, documentation, anything like that to help them kind of do some of their investigation. Occasionally they'll do the investigation outside of us. But most of the complaints that we have are researched within the brokerage.
Okay, so
And
go ahead.
I was just going to add to the complaints that do come into our call center through TransLink, they are all documented, and the resolution information is put in the grievance and complaint reports that are sent to the CCOs monthly. So they do have a copy of, the complaint and what the initial complaint that has come in and what the resolution was in regards to that. So those are reported to them on a monthly basis.
So is this portion of the process described in the notification to the member? So it seems like it's a very convoluted kind of process. You have OHA at the top providing ultimate evaluation of perhaps an appeal. And then you have the CCO that might have been given a complaint, which triggers an evaluation by the broker of a particular provider or incident that occurred. And I guess if I'm confused, I get processes, I think, but sometimes I need clarification. I did go to law school and study this stuff, but I am wondering how confusing it might be to members and how clear that is the entire process on your notification information.
So the NOABD letter that we send out is a template that we use that is from the CCO. So we use the NOAB template that they send us, and then we fill in the information about the denial, and then and the template would have that explain the process of appeal and how to start that. And there's also information in the writer's guide, as I was showing you. So they have all of that information, but they can also request, they can file a complaint with us through the call center. So, there's multiple ways of doing that. They can report their complaint to the CCO. They can report it to us. They can report it to the state. And I think all of those agencies will work together to try to resolve the issue. But we do provide information on how to further the process if they're not happy with the decision that we.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is that, sort of this no wrong door approach, that wherever a complaint comes in, it gets eventually to the right place that can investigate that and then resolve it. But I think, John, you bring up a point about sort of having this understanding of sort of the relationships between OHA and CCOs and brokerages may be helpful. So that may be an area that the TAC can make some recommendations about in terms of educational materials at a minimum. Jen, did you have something that you wanted to say or clarify on this?
Yeah, I was just going to essentially clarify and probably confirm several of the things that Tim and yourself just said. So we do absolutely operate as a no wrong door approach. So the member can absolutely file a grievance or a complaint with whichever entity they would like to. So whether that's the brokerage or the CCO or Care Oregon in our case, OHA, or even CMS. I mean, the member can file the grievance wherever. Ultimately, regardless of where they end up filing, there is going to need to be an investigation done. Sometimes the brokerage has already done the investigation. So the member may file a grievance with the brokerage, and they might also file one with the CCO, and there's nothing precluding them from doing so. In fact, there's a rule that states that they can do so. And so if that is the case, if we receive a grievance, like through Care Oregon, for example, but say TransLink has also already received that, we may request information from them and they will provide information based on the investigation that they've already done. If for whatever reason we get the grievance internally on our end, but TransLink hasn't done an investigation because nothing was filed with them, then they will have to initiate a grievance investigation process. So it really just depends on where the member's grievance is filed. But I definitely understand it can be very complicated.
And just to add, we work with a couple of CCOs, and so sometimes, like the CCO that we have over in Klamath Falls, sometimes they may get a complaint and they'll just work with us directly. Like they'll send us, like, please send us this information. So we may not know about the gist of the complaint, just that there's a complaint and that they're looking for this type of information. So I don't know what triggers requesting the information that way versus sending it to the brokerage and saying, please investigate. But it again, there's no wrong door. It's getting investigated. It just depends on who's doing that, collecting up the information.
Great. And Charles, let's give you the last word here on this piece, and then we'll move to our next area.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a little bit complicated, but really a lot of that is kind of inside baseball. So it's useful to know the process, but from the member side, regardless of who is doing it or what door they come through the process, from the member side should look virtually exactly the same. So while it's potentially a little bit of a complicated process behind the scenes, it really shouldn't be that hard to understand on the other side, and it's intentional so that everybody's using the exact same language, everybody's using the exact same templates, following the exact same rules. So regardless of who is doing the work, it should look virtually identical on the member side. So this is a little bit more behind the scenes that does make it appear more complicated perhaps than it really needs to or does on the member side itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Charles. So now we're going to shift again to sort of perspectives. We're going to move over to Elisa, who she and I haven't had a chance to sort of follow up on this, whether she has this information or not, but she was reaching out to look at it from sort of another perspective with the case manager side for APD, excuse me, program participants, and sort of what that experience has been for case managers. And then from there, we're going to go to sort of the OHP member side. And we've got Ellen Penny here from the Ombuds Office to share sort of with the experiences that the Ombuds Office is hearing around NEMT, specifically with complaints, concerns, frustrations, those types of things. So, Elisa, were you able to get any additional information on this from the case manager side?
I wasn't. I didn't ask because we have clients that call in saying that they've made complaints or they have complaints, right? And just share those with case managers. So there oftentimes our case managers are advocating those and either making those complaints on behalf of the client or provide them the step-by-step of how to do that. So I was really hoping to get some feedback and on just the grievance part, like after the complaint was made, what have they heard? Because a lot of times case managers won't hear what the outcome is, right? And so I wasn't able to get that feedback, just that we still have individuals making complaints or sharing their concerns. So still kind of waiting on that piece, and hopefully we'll get that feedback.
Okay. Yeah, great. Thank you. And maybe we can take just a minute here to see if Jen or Tim or Renee have any insights as far as their processes that they use when you have sort of a third party complainant to get information back from them about sort of resolution, whether that's detailed information, client specific or general information, or what that looks like in your own processes.
I'm sorry, are you referring to like if a facility calls in or to advocate for the member, or if it's...
Yeah, that would be an excellent example. It's basically somebody who's not the member, case manager, or facility, someone who's acting on their behalf or has seen something. Do you have a process in place to sort of to follow up with that person who's not the member? And we heard earlier, Ellen shared, from the ombuds perspective, many of those things would be sort of client privileged information, and obviously wouldn't be shared unless it was, a legal guardian. But so my question I'm asking is really sort of high level, more sort of high level information, sort of to close out the complaint and some sort of follow up, if any, with that actual complainant. So a facility would be a good example.
Usually if a member's residing at a facility, usually the facility is the one that's usually calling in, their NEMT requests or what have you. And if they, call us and let us know that, a driver is late or whatever, or they overslept supposedly and the member didn't get picked up and they missed their appointment, we gather just as much information from them as we possibly can. And we do reach out to the member to, ask them some additional questions if need be. Again, the process is pretty much the same. You're still going to gather all that pertinent information and make sure that you have everything that you need and still do your full investigation. And actually, when when the resolution letter does go out, it is actually addressed to the member. And again, if there's any follow-up or any additional questions that we need, we do reach out to the members in regards to that to make sure that we are receiving the correct information for the investigation.
Okay. So at least I think that this is similar to what we heard earlier. So this may be an area from a TAC perspective to sort of follow up on and make some recommendations to that people who are working on behalf of the member have some sort of closeout information and figuring out a way to strike that balance. So with that, and we can come back to this definitely, but with that, I'm going to ask Ellen if she's ready to share sort of stories and information that the Ombuds office is hearing from OHP members regarding NEMT concerns.
Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I've already introduced myself. NEMT I've been principal ombuds for close to 15 years now. NEMT was one of the first issues that came to my table in big numbers. It was about the same time that we decided as an agency to no longer pay for non-emergency medical transportation as a fee-for-service program, but to turn it over to our health plans. I have to say now, watching our health plans, and what a great presentation from Care Oregon. I don't know if they're still here, but bravo, standing ovation. Health plans aren't known for providing transportation in general. Clients don't know to look to their health plans to provide them with transportation. Still to this day, the percentage of OHP clients that actually use NEMT is minuscule compared to the numbers of OHP members. I'm talking like 5% of OHP members actually use NEMT. I think that's attributable to the fact that, again, most people don't know that NEMT is a benefit they can access. Well, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to tell you some more recent stories we've had. These have been highlighted in our Ombuds reports recently. Those reports are publicly available. Mom with an adult child with developmental disabilities and nonverbal in a wheelchair, consistently taking off work to take her son in his chair to many provider appointments for this young man, severely disabled again, nonverbal, no ability to read or write. The story that providers being late for providers appointments, even though she had taken time off to get her son in a wheelchair and get him ready for a ride that didn't show up, wound up when her case manager, comes DD Services case manager, chose to bring that complaint forward to the CCO. The CCO said, we can't talk to you. You're a case manager. We need a ROI from the client. Again, a nonverbal man in a wheelchair with developmental disabilities. At that particular time, they had picked the client and mom up on time and dropped the mom and client about 2 blocks from the provider's office in the pouring rain. Mom speaks Spanish, right? And was told that she could also not file a formal complaint on behalf of her child. Okay, so that's a more recent case. Lots of cases around confusion getting reimbursed for miles that somebody has driven, even when they request in advance. And because of the problems our program has heard so much of related to the brokerages, the entities with which our CCOs contract, and you have one of them on the line here. I'm not calling them out in specific. There are brokerages all over the state, right? But because of the problems with getting NEMT to be there on time, people actually being dropped by their provider for no issue other than they have not been able to get NEMT to show up on time. So those stories are heartbreaking to me, right? Like, these are people who have relationships with providers they are unable to keep because the provider said 3 strikes you're out, right? You've missed this appointment 3 times. We're talking about people with dialysis, people who should be known to have regular needs for NEMT. We heard from Central City Concern, which I believe provides addiction treatment, that they had such a bad time with NEMT that they just started paying for a taxi for all their clients to be able to get to their treatment on time, because those treatment appointments, I'm talking here about, I believe, methadone, right? Those treatments, they're scheduled. It's not like those appointments can be missed because it messes up other people's ability to access those appointments. I did write down, we had a recent call out, and I encourage this body to ask for them to come to talk to you from the Home Care Commission, which, as you may know, is people who care for our clients who need in-home services and supports. And those caregivers were like, we get our client ready for these rides. We help them schedule their rides. The ride doesn't show. We're not allowed to be paid to take them, which is a separate issue. I believe that to the extent we are hearing from organized groups like home care workers, and at one point the Ombuds program just heard from long-term care facilities, right? Like, we're talking here about clients who are in assisted living facilities whose caregivers spend time to get them ready for medical appointments, and there is a no-show by the medical appointment, but by the NEMT. We have we start talking to folks about, well, what are your options? Your options are finding someone to take you. You can, there is mileage. You have to use this kind of program in advance. But if you really want to get to where you're going, we can't vouch for your NEMT showing up on time. We encourage you, as and if you have options, to use your own transportation or get a friend to take you. That does not work for people with wheelchairs, right? It does not work because most people can't get a wheelchair into their car. So I have some good stories about NEMT, and the one I want to share with you is actually a really heartbreaking story, but it's a good story, right? Homeless woman, drug addicted, living under the bridge. Her sister engaged, finally found her, got her in a residential facility. NEMT took her to her appointment at a clinic. The client never showed back up home. And sister engaged the CCO and the brokerage, and they had footage of dropping the client off at that clinic. And what happened was she walked out the other door and she never came back. So that was a closed case for me because we didn't know how to reach the client. But the fact that the NEMT driver and that whole system had been able to track that specific client was so heartwarming to me in a very weird way, because truly, different complaint, the home should have sent her with somebody. She was too brand new out of substance use. We are probably going to put in our more recent report more information about NEMT complaints and concerns. I have to say that the grievance system is key to understanding the extent to which this is a problem and to digging into solutions. And there's problems with the grievance system the way it's set up. First of all, you have to reply in writing. There are so many complaints about NEMT needing a letter. I know clients who've complained over and over and over again, and the letters just keep coming, and they say, we are so sorry, right? We are so sorry. I feel like there needs to be a way of tracking concerns. CMS, CFR, Code of Federal Regulation, defines grievance as any expression of dissatisfaction. But the obligation to send a written response every time, as opposed to logging and ensuring that it doesn't happen again, it is a disincentive, I think, to reporting, really truly logging a grievance as opposed to a concern. Because some of these clients, again, just letter after letter after letter, and frankly, they just give up on NEMT. They find other ways of getting there.
Hey,
I feel, yeah,
maybe just like one more minute if you
one
want, if
more
you have
minute.
any sort
Yeah.
of wrap up comments or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be real interested if I were this TAC in understanding when a notice of adverse benefits decision is sent for NEMT, because those usually come after a denial. If you're denied NEMT, it's too late. If I were this body, I would be asking questions about to what extent a client needs to provide proof that they showed up at a provider's office when the CCO is going to get a claim for that anyway, given that they're driving themselves there and they can only get reimbursed in some cases if they have this very specific form that their provider signs. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it's incredibly essential work. And thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ellen. And thanks to all of our presenters. Some really great information. So let's take a couple of minutes to see if TAC members have questions for any of our presenters, panelists, and then we'll jump into sort of our brainstorming piece and talking about sort of recommendation ideas for OHA. So George?
This will be a question for Tim and Charles. If a client or consumer, how many complaints are they allowed to do, or how many grievances are they allowed to do before it becomes out of control?
Can you maybe clarify the question?
Like for instance, say like a person has been taken to the doctor and by a NEMT provider, and things don't go right, so they file a complaint there. So the next ride that they get, probably a week after that, another complaint's filed because they're not satisfied with a different provider. And then, say 2 weeks after that, another complaint is filed. What happens? How many complaints can a consumer do before it gets out of control?
I think it depends on the complaint. Typically, if we're seeing a complaint with an individual provider or driver, then we'll address it with that provider. And if we're having ongoing issues with the driver, we may suspend them or just say you're just not appropriate for this service, and basically let that driver go. But we address each of the complaints individually. But then we look at the big picture is like, is this a provider issue? Is this a call center issue? Is this a driver issue? Like, where do we put our energy and how do we resolve this? But if we're having the ongoing issue come up, usually we'll address it with the provider or the driver. And it may be a facility too. I mean, the truth is that lates can also happen when, where a driver is waiting for somebody to come out and they don't come out. They'll wait 15 minutes and then they'll go to their next ride. That may make them late for their next trip. So there's a lot of things that we have to look into in order to fully understand why somebody was late or why the service failed the rider.
Great. Thank you, Tim. John, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Well, I've heard in a couple instances where authority is needed by a representative who is acting on behalf of a member. My question to, I guess, any and all to whom this might apply is whether an advance directive is honored as sufficient authority or whether you need a full court order. So what level of authority would you honor? Let's start with the CCO.
Can you clarify your question? When you're referring to an advance directive, are you referring more to like an authorized representative, someone able to make decisions on a
Yes.
member's behalf?
So Oregon's been gung-ho on having people prepare advance directives, and it's especially emphasized in communities of senior folks and people with disabilities. I think a large portion of the CCO population. So advanced directives is a form that someone who with capacity will execute. It's not a formal court adopted kind of a form. It's an informal form, a form that's witnessed, and it says, if I can't make decisions on my own behalf, I authorize these people to do so. That's legal authority in each and every provider setting that is health related, but I'm wondering if it is sufficient authority inside of the NEMT world.
No, advanced directives don't really apply to NEMT because they're really more regarding healthcare decisions for a member, and none of our NEMT brokerages or transportation providers or drivers are ever making healthcare decisions for a member. So that would unfortunately not apply
I think
here.
that I respectfully disagree, but that's fine. I think it's something that we can take up in our discussions.
So a couple of things that I heard, John, folks saying would be sufficient is this release of information. So signed release by the client, by the member, to share information with whoever they're releasing it to, and then guardianship paper. So this gets to sort of the piece you were talking about with the legal court orders. So I guess I would ask, our transportation brokerages and CCO folks to confirm that those are correct. And it sounds like there might not really be any other sort of documents that would give people sort of that open communication ability. But
I can't speak for every CCO or every brokerage. I can only really speak for ours, of course, but we do have what we call an appointment of representative form. So if there is someone who needs to make decisions about the members' NEMT services for them, then we ask them to fill out that form so that we have it on file. Members can also verbally authorize someone to schedule a trip for them during the course of a phone call without necessarily needing to have that form on file. And that's really just like a verbal okay, like, yes, this person can schedule for me. But that's really the extent of it. We don't typically, from an NEMT brokerage perspective, gather any sort of documentation around like legal guardianship paperworks or anything else like that. Really, we try to keep it as limited as possible to an appointment of representation form. So we're not asking for advanced directives or guardianship paperwork or anything.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Jen. Leslie.
I'm curious to find out a couple of things. One is, I'm one of many people who use a caregiver. Is there an ROI for a caregiver? And the other thing is that I would like folks to address is the fear factor. I've had several problems with our NEMT down here, and have been afraid. This was several years ago. Now I'm not so fearful, but I was then I didn't want to make waves because down here, I don't know how things are up there, but down here in Southern Oregon, we have very few choices. And if you make waves with one organization, you may not be able to get another. And I use an oversized power wheelchair. So I don't have any of those choices. I have to use an EMT. What would people think about how would I best advocate for people that are experiencing fear? And if they don't have English as their first language, that may add to it. So I'm just curious about those two things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any just a sec, Ellen. Any sort of comments or feedback sort of on the piece on either of those pieces from Leslie around sort of retaliation or fear of retaliation for, creating waves, making complaints, etc. Um, anything on those lines?
When
Not a,
grievances are, oh,
oh,
go
go
for it,
ahead.
Tim.
Go ahead.
Oh, when grievances are filed through our like through the QA department for us, and it's regarding about a driver, and they fear that they might know all our information doesn't include the member's name on when we send over to them to gather what happened during that transport. So it's their name is just completely out of it. So there's no way of them having contact or feel like they're going to have retaliation against them.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a good protection. Okay. Anything else? Tim, were you going to say something similar?
I was just going to say that we try to make sure that we have staff here that are bilingual so that it's a little more comfortable having those conversations when they're scheduling their rides or they have questions. So that might help with some of the fear of just, being able to explain it a little bit better.
Great. Thank you. And Kathy, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks. As I'm listening to all of this, and I think others have remarked on this. I mean, this whole process takes a certain level of privilege or resource base to be able to navigate. And really, the clients that I work with, the Native Americans, a lot of people who are houseless, I mean, they don't have phones, they don't have addresses, they don't have advocates with the proper credentials. And a lot of their complaints have to do with the fact that they don't have addresses. So when they call the brokerage, they're told they can't get a ride. And then maybe they borrowed a phone, but they're on the phone for an hour and a half before they can get to anybody at that brokerage. And I know this is just some of the brokerages that are that bad, but those are the brokerages that are in our region, and it's been years. It's not like, oh, it's just been bad for a year or two. It's, what I hear from the healthcare providers and the transportation providers, the public transportation providers that I work with is, well, it's been bad for 20 years. So I just think, if it's been this bad for 20 years, why, and with this elaborate complaint process, why have these basic complaints not been addressed? I just keep thinking, how is this problem not, these two basic problems not been solved? And all I can think of is that the people who are having these problems do not have that level of privilege to be able to go through this process over and over and over again. I mean, the Native Americans I work with, if they get denied a ride because they are told, well, you don't have an address, they will not try again. They simply won't get health care, period.
Okay.
Can I just say,
Yeah,
David,
go ahead, Ellen.
I did, to Leslie's point, appreciate that you raised it, the fear of retaliation. I just want everybody to know that legislatively, the Oregon Health Authority Ombuds Program is required to serve as an advocate for people with Oregon Health Plan. We will help clients navigate this. To your point, Kathy, for every call we get, we know it represents at least 10 other people who would never know to call us. And one of the most exciting things I heard here was Care Oregon's presentation and that tracking they're doing. Because when I see a CCO with 0 complaints, I have as many concerns as I do when I see CCO with 350. So I just had to get those extra pieces in there. But I want you all to know that the Ombuds program serves as an advocacy entity for our members, and we are a good way to hedge against any retaliation. And I would have another success story related to a homeless client with whom we worked in Central Oregon. An EMT started picking him up at the end of the Forest Service road he lived on. Unbelievable story. True story. It happened. So can happen.
Great, great, thank you. And Joel, go ahead.
I haven't had a lot to say today just because I've been receiving a lot of this information, just kind of taking it in. But speaking from like a provider perspective, both to Kathy's point and to Leslie, I mean, these situations are so dynamic and these challenges are so dynamic, and there's a lot. I feel like at times it's been hard for us with our driving staff. I mean, you're talking about people that are extremely compassionate and want to help and have a desire to see things get worked out. And when all you feel like you can say is like, oh, well, you know, contact the ombudsman and you know, file a grievance or you know, make a request to the program or whatever. I think oftentimes when you're in the roles that a lot of us are in, you kind of feel like, what is the solution here? And how come we haven't been able to solve this yet? But at least just for me and the way that I've had my team hold this is that a lot of this is out of our control. And so we'll do the best that we can to be creative in trying to connect with people and create a plan. And the more conversation we can have, you know, with our network partners to figure out what we can do to serve people better is like kind of the only way forward. But I hear you guys, especially as like on the provider side, wanting to find ways to show up for people and, you know, be creative to find solutions to meet needs.
Great. Thank you, Joel. Jen?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Joel's point. That's something that we've also been exploring internally at Care Oregon. We know in particular there are some members who have more challenges than others, or they have more unique challenges. And so one of our interests, and we haven't implemented this yet, so this is probably going to be a 2025 project, but we're interested in implementing processes by which we look at members with recurring grievances, usually about the same thing, or who have a high volume of grievances, so that we can start to look at what are these creative solutions that we might be able to identify to help address a specific member's needs. Not every member has the same challenges. Not every member can have the same one-size-fits-all approach to resolving a grievance or a complaint. And so sometimes it really is just looking at each individual member's experience to figure out how we can really problem solve to meet their needs.
And to quickly respond to that, I think one thing that we've seen that's worked is, like you had addressed earlier, creating some exceptions, right? For obviously there's rules within like ride assignments and things like that, but like, hey, for whatever reason, this provider is working well with this member and they're able to meet their unique needs. And those sorts of exceptions and looking like, rather than like this, we're looking at more of the spirit of the law that rather than like the letter of the law in some of those instances, I think it creates more opportunity to be creative. And especially being a provider that has a desire to just help people at the base level, when there's opportunities for that are real and people are trying to work together to solve problems rather than just like, well, unfortunately we don't do that. Gosh, like we're all unique, right? We're all human beings. And so we kind of bring our own experiences and our own circumstances to the table. And I think the more we're open to that and open to exploring ways that work to solve it, think we're going to get somewhere a lot faster. So it's cool to see that there's already some of those things taking shape on your guys' end.
Great. Thank you, Joel. And Tim, and we just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to give us a wrap up. So Tim, if you want to give us something quickly.
I just wanted to speak to Kathy's point where about the homeless, somebody who's houseless and not able to get a ride. I think that's something that seriously needs to be put into rule. I thought that all brokerages essentially just pick people up where they had requested to be picked up, but I didn't know that if you didn't actually have a physical address, that they wouldn't negotiate with you on that pickup location. And that, to me, I think that just should be in rule.
Great. Thank you,
I
Tim.
want to follow up with that. Yeah, because what I did was, our Native Americans that live on the Columbia Gorge, it's not like they move around. They live in one place. They've lived there for, many generations. So what I offered the brokerages was I had the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission put together maps, GPS, maps of the sites where they live, exactly where the trailer is or the house or whatever it is that they live in, and that just went nowhere. So I don't know. Yeah,
So
it's really.
this is definitely on our radar as a TAC to put some recommendations together around that issue specifically. It sort of has fallen outside of sort of the areas that we've been talking about. It's been sort of off to the side, but we definitely need to, before we wrap up our work, put that together. And I think Tim's suggestion about just getting it into the rule so that it's really explicit and you all have something to point to is a good one. We've just got 3 minutes left, and I want to sort of talk about next steps, both with our work today, sort of winding that up, and then for our next TAC meeting in March. So what I would like, I've taken notes here. I think Bami's taking notes. So we have some good information about sort of from this discussion. We didn't get into as much as I had hoped to, sort of, brainstorming specific ideas together about recommendations around the grievances and appeals processes. But what I would like to ask TAC members to do is to send me ideas that you have, improvement recommendations that you have specifically related to grievances and appeals. And I'll continue to put those together, and then we, through email, can do some work sort of between meetings here to identify sort of a good working list that then we can of recommendations that then we can revisit at the beginning of our March meeting, hopefully get those finalized and then submitted to OHA around this specific topic. So I'll be reaching out to you to hear your ideas, and then I'll be putting those together and distributing those to all of our TAC members so that we can have some offline conversation about that, so that we can keep moving on this piece. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about sort of our March meeting. So up on the agenda for March is to talk about language access. So that's been we've heard that again today. It's been a frequently recurring area for our group here. So we're going to spend some time talking about language access and looking at improvements that may be able to be made. And then also another big one, which we have had quite a few conversations about, and I think we have some good progress on. And so hopefully in the March meeting, we're able to do some wrap up on this. It's really around no-shows, accountability around no-shows, and then the possibility of having some areas where you can actually get paid for no-shows if certain things are in place, and talking about what those certain things are. And we have our planning groups. So we had the planning group that helped put January's meeting together for today. Our planning group for the March meeting is Joel, John, Leslie, Tim, and Shannon. So be looking for an email from me, the 5 of you, to start our work on those pieces. So with that, I think we're out of time. Super excellent presentations. Appreciate everyone so much, and really great discussion from our presenters and from our TAC members. So this has been really helpful and engaging, and I think that will lead to some good recommendations and hopefully improvements coming out of this. So thank you all so much, and we'll be talking soon. Bye-bye. George, did you have something for me?
Yes, I didn't get my question answered.
Yeah, so this was the question about the federal requirements.
The CMS, yes.
Yeah, so we have that as I'll make sure that we get that on our action item list, and I'll work with OHA to get some sort of answer put together for you.
Okay, because it's going to be working for everything else that's medical too. So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. If there's a broad change going into place, then it makes sense that would apply to our work here too. So if you have any additional details, George, that you can send to me, then that'll be a helpful place for us to get started. So if you want to send those to me, or I can reach out to you and we can talk in a little bit more detail.
well, I don't think CMS from DC has sent me the materials. We just talked about it.
Okay, sure.
That's where it all got started.
Okay. All right. Well, let me see what I can figure out with OHA, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Okay,
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
thanks.